Okay, so we're ready to start talking about the integumentary system, which is chapter 6. So we will begin by looking sort of at an introduction and then looking at the major layers within the integumentary system. So here we go. So the integumentary system is composed primarily of the skin, but also includes the accessory structures that we associate with the skin. So the hair, the nails, the sudoriferous glands, those are the sweat glands, and the sebaceous glands that produce oil. So, and dermatology is the branch of medicine that deals with the skin. So let's take a look then at some of the functions of, or describe the skin a little bit deeper, and then we'll look at the functions of the skin. So the skin is by far the largest organ of the body when we look at it by weight. And it's composed of two types of tissues: epithelial tissues, so that's the surface or the most superficial tissue of the skin, and then connective tissues, primarily the dense irregular connective tissues and areolar tissues. So the thickness of skin can vary between 1.5 millimeters to up to 4 millimeters in thickness. And in the average size adult, we see somewhere between 15 and 20 square feet of skin on the body. Weighs approximately 9 pounds. And I like these little statistics here. For every square inch of skin that you have, there's about 15 feet worth of blood vessels, 12 feet worth of nerves, something on the order of 1,500 sensory receptors, 650 sweat glands, and approximately 100 oil glands. So there's a lot of activity going on there in your skin. So when we look at some of the functions related to skin, we see first, and primarily, because it's that first tissue that anything encountering the body is going to come up against, protection and defense. And so we'll see as we start investigating, especially the epithelial layers of the skin, the epidermis, that the dense layers of skin cells that are all highly keratinized helps to protect us from chemicals, from biological invaders, and from physical damage. We've got all those dense layers, so we don't get scraped, or at least the soft tissues underneath the skin don't get scraped as much as they would otherwise. We also see hydroregulation as a function, hydro meaning water. So this is the protein in the skin. It's called keratin. The keratin in the skin is a mostly waterproof protein, and so this layer serves as a bound or a barrier to water loss. It's also heavily involved in thermoregulation. We've talked about this a fair bit already in the class. And so the capillary networks that are associated with the skin and the sweat glands producing their watery sweat both are heavily involved in thermoregulation. And we'll be discussing some of that in this chapter too. When we sweat, we certainly are getting rid of excess water as well. If we have excess water in the body, sometimes we can lose too much water when we sweat. And some metabolic wastes, primarily uric acid and urea, the nitrogenous wastes that we produce when we break down proteins, can be lost in the sweat as well. It's highly involved in sensory reception. We can feel touch. Pain is felt in the skin, deep pressure, so like somebody giving you a nice deep massage, heat, and cold. We have receptors for all of these kinds of sensations. There's a lot of chemical production, the synthesis, of chemicals in the skin. So vitamin D, melanin, keratin are all materials that are produced by the skin. Vitamin D, if you know that one, that is a vitamin that's involved in drawing calcium from the foods that we eat. So without vitamin D, we don't have sufficient calcium in our body tissues. Melanin is the coloration that we see in skin and hair and other colored parts of the body. And keratin, again, is that tough, waterproof protein. And then last of all, absorption can happen at the skin. UV light is absorbed at the skin, and some chemicals. We know this because we use that, in fact, as a way to deliver drugs to the body through patches. So there are now patches that deliver nicotine, that deliver hormones. So a lot of things can be delivered directly through the skin. So lots of functions to the skin. It's that outer layer that is protective, that helps us sense, that is involved with lots of production of chemicals, that can even absorb materials across the skin. So lots of functions involved with skin. So now let's take a look at the layers of the skin. There are two distinct layers. The most superficial layer is the epidermis. And that one is built of a stratified squamous epithelium. And it is an avascular tissue. So if you remember, epithelial tissues are avascular. A meaning without. Vascular, what is that a reference to? Yeah, you got it. That means no blood vessels. So it's avascular. Deep to the epidermal layer is the dermis, and it is built of a connective tissue that's actually, it's that should say leathery connective tissue. It's the portion of, say, a cow's skin that we turn into leather. It's the hide of the skin, and it's got a lot of collagenous and elastic fibers in it, and it is highly vascularized. In fact, it can hold up to 5% of the sorry about that, went too far. Up to 5% of the total blood supply of the body. Deep to the dermal layer is the subcutaneous layer, also sometimes referred to as the hypodermis. It's not considered part of the skin, but because this is really the only chance in the class that we have to talk about the subcutaneous layer, the book kind of slides it in here. So it's composed. It is composed of areolar tissue and adipose tissue. About half of the body fat is found here. The other half is associated around the organs, especially in the ventral body cavity, but also around the kidneys. But so this is that this is that layer of fat that you can pinch if you grab a hunk of your belly or some other place. It binds the skin layers, the epidermis and the dermis, to the underlying muscle and other tissues that we find just deep to the skin layers. And it functions primarily as insulation to the body, and it provides a route for the major blood vessels and for nerves to get to the skin. So here we've got, there's a blood vessel in the subcutaneous layer. Here's another blood vessel. So that brings into the body the larger blood vessels coming from the heart or returning back to the heart. These larger blood vessels come in through the subcutaneous layer, and then they branch out into the dermal layer of the cutaneous membrane. Okay, so subcutaneous layer. I'm trying to think what else to tell you about this. The big thing to know is that it's got a lot of fat as well as areolar tissue, and its job really is to bind the skin to underlying muscles. Okay, so let's go back and look now at the epidermis, the cells of the epidermis. There are two primary cell types. One of them is a keratinocyte. So these are the most abundant of the epidermal skin cells. And right here would be the basement membrane that separates the epithelial layer from the dermal layers underneath. So everything above the basement membrane is a keratinocyte. Almost everything, I said that. So the bulk of the cells that you see there are keratinocytes. And they're tightly connected by by those intercellular junctions called desmosomes. And so they hold the skin cells, the epidermal cells, tightly to each other, especially laterally. So the connection from side to side is very strong between the keratinocytes. And that's why when you get sunburned and you damage that skin layer, as the sunburn heals, sometimes the skin can peel off in really large sheets because the desmosomes do such a good job of holding the skin together. And their function, or a primary function of the keratinocytes, is that they produce that keratin, tough, waterproof protein. Oops, that's weird. Okay. It's a tough, fibrous protein, and it helps to waterproof the epithelial layers. So keratinocytes are one of the primary cell types that we see in the epithelial layer. The other primary cell type is called a melanocyte. Melanocytes. These are deep in the epidermis. They have a surface. They're down at the basement membrane. So one of their surfaces is attached at the basement membrane, and their job is to produce a pigment called melanin, and they package it up in these little membranous vesicles called melanosomes. So soma meaning body, so it's like a little body that holds a bunch of melanin inside of it. And so the melanosomes are produced down here, and I almost, when I look at a melanocyte, especially this cartoon that the book uses, what I see is kind of an upside-down octopus with its long arms extending up in among all the keratinocytes. And that melanocyte produces these little packets of pigment, and that's what these little dark things are. And it sends them out up into these long processes that go up into the skin, and it sheds these I can barely say it either. These melanosomes, it sheds them off, and directly, the keratinocytes just pick up the melanin packages. And they arrange those melanin packages so that they are on the superficial side of the nucleus. So those melanosomes, as they come in, are going to be placed especially up here on the superficial side of the cell. And so they're there, and as UV light comes onto the skin, and remember, or you should know that UV light can be very damaging, has a lot of energy in it, and can break up a piece of DNA, so that UV light is absorbed by those melanosomes and doesn't have a chance to get to the nucleus and destroy the nuclear material inside. So this is a micrograph of a melanosome. So here is the base of it, and it's hard to see where the appendages are, the long processes are in this micrograph, but these cells here are all melanocytes sitting down there at the basement membrane. So one of the functions, or one of the outcomes of having this melanin in our keratinocytes, is that it gives skin color to our skin. And I love this picture. It's taken from National Geographic, and it shows sort of the range of skin colors from the very light-skinned colors here, where there's very little melanin production, all the way down here to the much darker-skinned individuals who produce a fair bit of melanin and invest it into their skin. The activity of the melanocytes is under genetic control, and so it's the genes that determine how active our melanocytes are going to be. And the genes also determine what color of melanin we produce. So melanin has a range of colors from a really dark brown, almost black color, to a very light, pale, kind of reddish or yellowy kind of color. So lots of different colors of melanin as well. And so it's, we have skin colors that we inherit from our parents, And so that is the primary determinant of the color of the skin that we have. But there is also some environmental control, because UV light or exposure to UV light will increase melanin production as well. Again, as that for that protective benefit that it provides. So skin color is highly, highly influenced by the melanocytes and the melanin that they produce, either because of the genetic characteristics of the makeup of the body that ensure, that we resemble our parents, or because as those melanocytes are activated by exposure to ultraviolet light, that produces a much, much darker skin. We call that tanning. There are other influences on our skin color as well, though. When we are well oxygenated, because of all of the blood vessels that are found there in the dermal layers, the skin in light-colored or light-skinned folk can take on kind of a pinkish color. If the vessels are dilated, then that will make the skin darker, depending on how dark your skin is. But even people with fairly dark shades of skin will become even darker if they blush, if there's dilation of the blood vessels. If the blood that is going through those capillaries is poorly oxygenated, then that can give a kind of a bluish color. And so here we have a picture of a little baby who is experiencing cyanosis, and you can see the bluish colors here around the lips especially. That's one place that we can look and see cyanosis very clearly. That term cyan, that's the color blue. Cyan means blue. And then, of course, if vessels become constricted so that we can see the capillaries less, then that leads to a much paler shade of skin. Regardless of skin color, you can become paler. So, when we get frightened or if we get cold, then we have a tendency to become much paler skinned. And then last of all, the diet. Your diet can also influence skin color. Carotene is a pigment that's found in the squashes especially. So it's a yellow-orange pigment. We see it in squashes like butternut squash and pumpkin, but we can also see it in carrots, and even beets have carotene in them. And it's a precursor to vitamin K. So we can make vitamin K using carotene. And it turns out that vitamin K is very important to skin health. And so the skin will selectively take up vitamin K, or take up carotene, and in order to have a healthy supply of vitamin K to the body. And so I had a woman in my class one time who she said she had got a juicer and was juicing a lot of carrots and was drinking carrot juice all the time until she turned this very kind of orangey, carroty color hue. And so I did some searching on the internet, and I found this picture where we see a person who is experiencing, again, we're looking at a person with very light skin or pale skin. That's a normal color, but this hand here is from a person who has consumed a lot of carrots or carrot juice or something, and you can see the orangish color that it's given to that person's skin. So carotene will accumulate in skin cells and will add to the color of skin as well. And then there are some conditions that can also affect skin color. So jaundice is a condition that is characterized by liver malfunction. And so without the liver breaking down, especially like red blood cells, so as the liver stops functioning well, it can't break down the components of red blood cells very easily. And so bilirubin begins to accumulate. It also happens in little babies. It's the accumulation of these pigmented materials in the skin cells, and it can turn the body, and especially the skin, and especially even the whites of the eye, a very disconcerting yellow color. And so this, I believe that was a picture of a woman. I cropped it some, but she was experiencing liver malfunction and associated jaundice. And then there is finally a condition known as albinism. It's a genetic condition, People who are albino, they have melanocytes. In fact, they have a normal number of melanocytes. And I forgot to mention earlier, but regardless of your skin color, whether you produce no pigment, like people who deal with and experience albinism, or if you have really dark-skinned colors, like we see among the people who are indigenous to equatorial regions of the Earth. So, the native Indian cultures of Central and South America, or the cultures of Africa or Australia, the native cultures there. We all have the same number of melanocytes. What really determines skin color is the activity of those melanocytes. So albinism is a genetic condition in which the melanocytes are there, but they don't have the ability to produce functional melanin. And so people who deal with and live with albinism have very pale skin. They have white hair. The iris of their eye can even be really unpigmented. And so the iris takes on a pinkish color because of the blood vessels that are associated with the iris. So all of these, all these kinds of conditions or the characteristics of the body contribute to the color that we see. So that's it for this first video, and stay tuned. There's more to come.